Now, Zambia hopes to finalize its long-delayed debt restructuring process. After defaulting over 3 years ago, President Hakainde Hichilema now says that the country has reached an in-principle agreement with bondholders as it awaits complete deals. Irmgard Erasmus, senior financial economist at Oxford Economics Africa, joins us to assess Zambia's post-debt restructuring prospects. Thank you so much for your time, Irmgard. Now, I remember it like it was yesterday when panic rippled across the continent after Zambia defaulted during COVID in its debt. Of course, it's been more than 3 years of negotiations there on this debt restructure. What have you made of this process and the time that it has taken to get to this point?
Yes, indeed. Zambia was the first COVID era, although not COVID-induced defaulter at that stage. And it is going through a very protracted debt negotiation since then. Some of it is due to idiosyncratic reasons. So the other one is Zambia is essentially seen as a blueprint for the G20's common framework approach to debt treatments. Unfortunately, as kind of the case study, there was details that needs to be kind of figured out along the way, which the brunt has unfortunately been borne by Zambia in that case. For instance, we have seen that in November of last year, there was an announcement of an agreement in principle between Eurobond holders and the Zambian government, which was then unfortunately vetoed by the Official Creditor Committee. So with the greater clarity regarding the comparability of treatment criteria from the OCC, it has indeed been a very welcome step forward, not only for Zambia, but for the common framework debt treatment as a whole. So the next phase, once the Eurobond swap is concluded, is also to conclude the debt restructuring with other commercial creditors. And Zambia has indicated that it is making good progress on that side.
Is there any indication of the amount of time then that, has been allocated to this kind of last hurdle, or are things still unclear at this point?
The last stage is about 3.3 billion USD, and it's primarily with some of the development banks, credit and other commercial lenders. But once there has been more clarity regarding the comparability of treatment criteria, that has really smoothed the way forward. So a big hurdle with the common framework approach to debt treatment was how to interpret the equitable burden sharing principle. And it has now been greater clarity regarding what the specific guidelines is to ensure that one creditor is not carrying an asymmetric burden of the debt restructuring than the other. So this greater clarity is indeed smoothing the way forward, which make the final phases of the external debt restructuring much more a quicker and an easier kind of stage.
All right. Well, I mean, once the debt restructuring is finalized, how much space then will that give Zambia in terms of its economic growth prospects and also investment profile?
Well, firstly, the conclusion of the external debt restructuring will give some clarity regarding the public debt ratio of the reductions, and also what Zambia's external financing needs will be over the medium term. Now, unfortunately, a big component of your external financing need is also the current account, and specifically the merchandise trade account, which is a big contributor or detractor thereof. In Zambia's case, unfortunately, the power situation, which is due to an El Nino-induced drought, is really crunching your power generation capacity. And this is railroading some of the very good progress that Zambia has made in order to improve its copper output. If this is not adequately addressed, unfortunately, it does mean that Zambia's external financing requirements as a whole will still remain quite large. And this will have implications for the accumulation of FX reserves, inflation, and then also the strength of the kwacha exchange rate. So unfortunately, Zambia is not out of the woods yet. Due to this drought, which was in February declared as a national disaster by the president, it also means we've seen inflation escalating again, specifically due to food price inflation. So the consumer is still overly burdened. And just the conclusion to the external debt restructuring, although it will give more clarity and also provide less sentiment-induced outflows, unfortunately does not solve the other slew of kind of challenges that Zambia is facing at this stage.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting that this, debt situation is not the only hurdle. There are other things that could, kind of limit that growth momentum. But also, would you say that in terms of the implications of the kind of delays that we've seen in this debt restructuring, that there are implications there that might linger for longer than maybe had been anticipated, that it won't be easy for some of these implications to subside, immediately?
Okay, there is still a lot of moving parts, essentially.
Yeah.
And the protracted external debt restructuring has given an endogeneity challenge. For instance, when you do update your macroeconomic assumptions right now, the very long delay in it means that your external financing requirement and the calculation that form part of it, your input variables is changing.
Yeah.
So once that has to be recalculated, you see a wider shortfall, which means larger funding resources that needs to be tapped into. Now,
Yeah.
Zambia has really drawn upon a lot of support from multilateral banks, the IMF obviously being a big one, and the World Bank. Once again, now with the food security challenge they do have now, they once again have to draw upon external support in order to bridge that gap. Similarly, the country is going through a challenge with its power generation capacity due to over-reliance on hydropower, and as a result needs to import power. And once again, this is adding to the pressure on your current account. On the other hand, whether this is meaning anything to the other African countries is also going through an external debt kind of restructuring. The Ghanaian case, obviously they are going through a comprehensive debt restructuring, which comprise not only the external debt restructuring, but also the local currency restructuring, which has already been completed. In the case of Ethiopia, a bit more convoluted. We have now seen that the IMF mission has concluded without a deal in place, but there are positive indications that they will resume talks later this month in Washington at the spring meetings. A good kind of indicator on that regard is also that the Paris Club creditors that forms part of Ethiopia's official credit committee has allowed for an extension of a deadline that they attached to the interim debt service suspension. But overall, although all these three countries utilize the common framework as an approach to debt treatment, the type of crises and also the way to kind of solve the challenge that they do have differs quite a bit, and it really just kind of brings home the emphasis on looking at your idiosyncratic factors and making sure that the debt resolution is catered to a country's needs specifically.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Irmgard, just giving us insights on Zambia's post-debt restructuring prospects, but also what other countries could learn and maybe do when it comes to that G20 common framework for debt treatment. Thank you so much for your time. That was Irmgard Erasmus, Senior Financial Economist at Oxford Economics Africa.